Picture alone. A lone cowboy leaning on a weathered fence post as the scorching sun bakes the desert sand. Then across the dusty horizon, you see her a mysterious woman, covered head to toe in mud, clutching a half-conscious child. With the final shreds of her dignity dripping from her muddy clothes, she staggers toward the ranch house, desperate but fierce. The cowboy, torn between duty and compassion, makes a split-second decision, one that will alter the course of his life forever. He marries her on the spot, a stranger, just to give her dying son one last chance at life. And yet that's only the beginning. The orange glow of the evening sun stretched across the rugged plains of Wyoming, like a molten river of fire, a daily spectacle that both awed and troubled the residents of the frontier. The wide-open land offered a sense of freedom, but with freedom came the threat of lawlessness. Life was often harsh. The wind carried the secrets of battles lost and promises broken, swirling dust around in restless, ghostly spirals. It was against this tempestuous backdrop that the Caldwell Ranch stood strong and unyielding. Wooden fences extended in uneven lines, designed as much to mark territory as to keep the livestock from straying too far. Small clusters of cattle and horses grazed in the dusky glow, flicking their tails to ward off mosquitoes. Ranch hands concluded their chores, wiped their brows, and trudged toward their bunks. High above the sky was turning a dusky mauve, the first stars timidly revealing themselves. The ranch was owned by Matthew Caldwell, a name that carried respect across Johnson County. Those who'd known him from boyhood still called him Matt, a sign of friendship he neither discouraged nor invited. He was in his early 30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the composure of a man hardened by experience. Though he tried to keep to himself, fate often had a habit of thrusting the unwilling into the center of events. On this particular evening, as the sun's farewell glimmer caught the sweat on his skin, Matthew couldn't shake the uneasy feeling coiling in his gut. He had felt it since early afternoon, a strange prickle on the back of his neck that warned him something was about to break in his life. He didn't know whether it would be good or bad, only that it would be significant. Out here in the shadowy frontier, life could change in a heartbeat. He looked down the dusty trail that led from town to the ranch. The horizon was empty. Still, his heart pounded with anticipation. Though he did not yet know it, a woman caked in mud and desperation was about to shatter the carefully built stillness of his world, and neither of them would ever be the same. Matthew Caldwell had been born into a large ranching family somewhere near Fort Laramie. As a child, he'd learned the art of roping calves, breaking horses, and reading the subtle shifts in weather. When he was no more than 14, he lost his father in a range war that sprang up over water rights. Since that day, Matthew had sworn he'd never let violence become a part of his life. That vow, however, didn't stop trouble from finding him. Over the years, his grit and integrity had earned him the respect of older ranchers. John Harrington, a well-known rancher from Cheyenne, once told the territorial governor that Matthew Caldwell was the single most reliable man in Wyoming, always honest, always fair. But while that reputation brought him good neighbors and trade partners, it didn't shield him from the emptiness that settled over his heart each night. The ranch was large, the hours long, and the nights lonely. People had tried to fix him up with local women. They whispered about Miss Elizabeth Carter, the daughter of a wealthy landowner in the region, or Harriet McCrae, the spinster school teacher with a heart of gold. But Matthew was never swayed. He kept his ranch and his heart as carefully guarded as a fortress on a hill. In frontier towns, rumors sprouted like tumbleweeds. Some said he wasn't interested in love. Others said he was too haunted by the memory of his father's death to open up. He never spoke of it, and people never dared to ask. So each day, he rose before sunrise to work the land. He pulled stray calves out of ravines, mended fences battered by storms, and oversaw a dozen ranch hands who admired him but rarely saw beneath his stoic shell. By sunset, exhaustion claimed him, and he'd drift into restless sleep. Until that fateful evening when destiny arrived in the form of a desperate mother, covered in mud, cradling a son on the brink of death. Lucy Thompson had reached the end of her rope. She had a boy of about 9 named Jonah, who was sicker than any child should ever be. They'd been moving from one dusty town to another in search of a doctor who could cure him, or at least keep him alive. Fever had ravaged Jonah's body for weeks, leaving him frail and silent. Lucy had grown up in the outskirts of Chicago and married young, naively believing that her husband Stephen was a kind man. When Jonah was just a baby, Stephen revealed a penchant for cards, whiskey, and a vicious temper. He abandoned them without a second thought. Lucy had no choice but to return to her aging parents. Then tragedy struck again. Her parents died in a house fire, leaving her and Jonah all alone in the world. Determined not to give up, Lucy took menial jobs to survive. She cooked in saloons, scrubbed floors in boarding houses, and mended clothes in ramshackle huts for pennies. Every day was a struggle, and Jonah was her beacon. She would do anything for that boy. She heard rumors of a skilled frontier doctor, Dr. James Whitman, who had been known to treat the most hopeless cases. Though it cost Lucy nearly every coin she had, she made the difficult wagon journey into Wyoming. But fate seemed set against her. A torrential downpour flooded the winding roads. Their wagon got caught in the rising currents of a raging creek. Lucy and Jonah were thrown from the seat. She clung to him as the muddy water enveloped them, swirling in a terrifying swirl of debris. By the grace of God, they somehow made it to the bank. But the horses and the wagon were gone, lost in the swirling torrent. Drenched in silt and trembling from the cold, Lucy pressed Jonah's head to her chest, willing him to breathe. She had only one direction to go forward. The next morning, half dead with exhaustion, Lucy trudged along a dirt path, hoping it led somewhere safe. Jonah drifted in and out of consciousness, his feverish body limp in her arms. She prayed for a miracle, but miracles were not easily granted on the frontier. By afternoon, her mouth was parched, her stomach cramped with hunger, and hopelessness began to creep in. Then she saw a faint outline, a ranch house on the horizon. Summoning her last ounce of energy, Lucy staggered toward it. Matthew Caldwell, still unsettled by that odd premonition, was standing near the barn when he noticed movement in the distance, a figure stumbling. He called out to his ranch hand, Ben Randall, who was loading hay bales onto a wagon. "You see that?" Matthew asked, squinting toward the horizon. Ben followed his gaze. "Looks like a person. Maybe 2. What in tarnation?" Without a word, Matthew saddled up his horse. If someone was in trouble, he needed to help. He'd encountered too many tragedies on the open plains to ignore a stranger's plight. Spurring his mare, he rode off, dust rising in his wake. The sight that greeted him when he approached shook him to the core. Lucy could barely stand. Her dress was torn, caked in dried mud. She was covered in scrapes, and the mud had dried on her skin, forming a stiff shell on her arms and face. Jonah was in worse shape, pale, his breathing, shallow eyes half-lidded in delirium. Lucy's throat burned as she tried to speak. No words came out, just a raspy croak. Matthew dismounted in one swift motion, rushing to kneel beside her. Gently he placed a hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Miss, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" Her eyes flickered with relief and desperation. She pointed to Jonah. No strength left in her voice. Matthew carefully lifted the child, pressing an ear to his chest to make sure he was still breathing. Then he turned to Lucy. Her lips were cracked, her face streaked with tears that had dried into the mud. "Please," she rasped. "Help my boy." Matthew wasted no time. He whistled, and Ben Randall came galloping with another horse and a wagon. They carefully placed Lucy and Jonah into the wagon. Matthew mounted his horse and led the way back to the ranch, at a gallop, dust clouds chasing them. He had no idea who this woman was or what had happened, but he understood one thing. If help didn't come quickly, that boy would die. The commotion reached the ranch house before Matthew did. By the time they arrived, a handful of the ranch hands had gathered wide-eyed. Matthew barked orders like a seasoned general, ordering them to bring hot water, clean cloths, and the best blanket they had. They carefully carried Lucy and Jonah inside, where Mrs. Rosemary White, who served as the cook and caretaker, took one look at the boy and gasped. "He's burning up," she said, pressing her hand to Jonah's forehead. "I can feel the fever from here." Lucy managed a feeble nod, still too weak for words. She looked around uneasy, yet relieved to be indoors. The ranch hands cleared a space in the main room, laying Jonah on a sofa by the fireplace. Lucy tried to follow, but her knees wobbled. Matthew caught her just in time. "Take her to the guest room," he told Mrs. White gently. "She needs rest, too." Mrs. White guided Lucy down a narrow hallway. Lucy hardly noticed her surroundings. Her thoughts were trapped in a cycle of panic about Jonah's condition. She collapsed on a simple wooden bed, and darkness swallowed her. Meanwhile, Matthew called for Dr. James Whitman, who by a stroke of fortune was visiting the neighboring ranch to tend to a broken leg on a ranch hand. He sent Ben Randall on horseback to fetch the doctor. While waiting, Matthew placed a bowl of water next to Jonah, sponging the boy's forehead as best he could. Jonah tossed and turned, muttering nonsensical words in his fevered delirium. When Dr. Whitman arrived, his expression was grave. He set to work immediately, checking Jonah's pulse, breathing, and the color of his tongue and fingernails. Lucy awoke in time to see the doctor rummaging through his medical bag. When she tried to stand, Matthew wordlessly offered his arm. She clung to him, steadying herself as they both watched Dr. Whitman carefully measure out powders and drops into a small cup. "This child is very ill," Dr. Whitman announced. "His fever must be brought down. He needs rest, nourishment, and constant care. I'll do what I can, but I must be honest, his chances are slim if he can't get the right environment and medication for a sustained period." Lucy's voice trembled. "He's all I have, Doc. Please." Whitman nodded sympathetically. "We'll do our best." Matthew saw the silent despair in Lucy's eyes. She was like a cornered animal bracing for the worst blow. Something stirred within him, a fierce urge to protect the boy and his mother. He had no idea that this impulse would soon lead him into a life-altering choice. For the next few days, Lucy hovered by Jonah's bedside, feeding him spoonfuls of broth and wiping the sweat from his brow. Dr. Whitman visited daily, adjusting the boy's treatment. Matthew offered his help in any way possible, even though Lucy still felt uneasy accepting his hospitality. She was not one to rely on strangers, but fate had left her no choice. Word spread through the ranch that Jonah's condition was critical. Some of the ranch hands tried to lighten the atmosphere, leaving small gifts by the door: a fresh loaf of bread, carved wooden toys, and even a jar of wildflowers. Lucy was overwhelmed by kindness she'd never experienced. One afternoon, Mrs. White approached Lucy with a firm but gentle expression. "Mr. Caldwell would like to speak with you in the study." Lucy had been dreading this conversation. She knew Jonah's care must be expensive. Medicine, the doctor's visits, the food. She hadn't a dime left. She took a deep breath, straightened her mud-stained dress as best she could, and stepped into the ranch's modest study. Matthew stood by a large window that overlooked the corral. He turned at her entrance, removing his hat. For a moment, neither spoke. Lucy noticed how the light cast a warm glow on his features, revealing concern etched into his lined brow. "How is he?" Matthew asked. Lucy swallowed hard. "The fever's down a little, but Dr. Whitman says he needs more time. I can never thank you enough for all you've done." Matthew exhaled. "No thanks needed, ma'am. It's the decent thing to do." She opened her mouth to speak, but was halted by the weight of her predicament. She was in a stranger's home, with no money, no means of supporting herself or her son. Matthew seemed to read her thoughts. He cleared his throat. "I've been talking with Dr. Whitman about Jonah's condition. He says the boy needs consistent care and a stable environment for at least a few months, maybe longer. Traveling could kill him." Lucy's eyes welled. "He's all I have," she whispered. Matthew nodded. "I get that. I also know what it's like to lose family. I don't want that for you or for Jonah. He paused, struggling with his words. "I want to help, but there's something we should discuss." Her heart thumped. "What is it?" Matthew removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "You need a place to stay, and Jonah needs a father figure if something ever happens to you. The law is tricky out here. If you stay as a guest, folks might start asking questions. Some might think things. They might run you off or cause trouble. You don't have money to pay for his care or to find a doctor in another town." Lucy stiffened. "I know. I can work. I can cook, clean, whatever you need me to do until Jonah recovers." He nodded slowly. "It's not just about labor. It's about your boy's future. Dr. Whitman said Jonah's best chance is right here on this ranch where he can rest. But to make sure he's truly protected under my roof, I would propose marriage." Time seemed to freeze. Lucy felt as if she'd been struck by lightning. She blinked. "Marriage? You don't know me." "I don't," Matthew said carefully. "But out here, an unmarried woman and her child living under a bachelor's roof will stir endless gossip. Worse if you run into trouble with your son's father." Lucy shuddered at the memory of Stephen's violence. Matthew continued. "The law recognizes a husband and wife. If we marry, I can ensure Jonah's well-being, not just now, but in the future. He'd have my name if you wanted it, and nobody can force you to leave. You'd have a claim on the ranch if something happened to me. It ain't perfect, but it might save his life, and it might give you both a chance at a new start." Lucy's mind spun. She had never imagined herself marrying a stranger, but then again, she'd never imagined trudging through muddy floods with a dying child either. Survival had become her only priority. She found her voice, though it trembled. "Are you sure about this?" Matthew took a step toward her, his tone gentle but firm. "I'm sure it's the only way I can guarantee Jonah the help he needs. If you can think of any other way, I'm all ears." Lucy's thoughts turned to her son, the only person who mattered in the world. She recalled Jonah's sunken cheeks and labored breathing. If a marriage on paper was what it took to save him, who was she to refuse? "All right," she whispered. "I'll do it." News spread faster than wildfire through the ranch and into the nearby settlement. Matthew Caldwell was to marry a mysterious woman who appeared on his land covered in mud with a dying child in her arms. The rumor mill churned out endless variations of the story. Some said Lucy was a mail-order bride gone wrong. Others that she was a witch who'd bewitched Matthew with potions and spells. The truth was simpler, yet more shocking to some. It was an act of compassion, pure and simple. The wedding was hastily arranged under the wide Wyoming sky. Dr. Whitman insisted that Jonah stay indoors in bed, as any commotion might worsen his condition. Lucy, pale and exhausted, stood by Matthew's side in the ranch's courtyard. The local preacher, a kindly man by the name of Reverend Alan Sullivan, arrived on horseback, dusty Bible in hand. A handful of ranch hands looked on solemnly. Mrs. White dabbed her eyes, though whether from joy or worry no one could be certain. Matthew's normally stoic face was set in a determined expression. Lucy wore a borrowed dress from Harriet McCrae, hastily altered the night before. The hem dragged in the dirt, and the bodice was a tad loose, but it was clean. The last traces of dried mud had been scrubbed from her hair and skin, leaving her cheeks pink. Despite everything, she looked heartbreakingly fragile. Reverend Sullivan cleared his throat and opened his Bible. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." A sudden roll of thunder interrupted him. Dark clouds, unnoticed until now, loomed overhead. A cold wind cut across the courtyard, rattling loose shutters. Then came the downpour, a hammer of rain that drenched everyone in seconds. The ranch hands scrambled for cover. Reverend Sullivan raised his voice above the roar. "Do you, Matthew Caldwell, take Lucy Thompson to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Matthew grabbed Lucy's hand, pressing it firmly. She looked up, rain streaming down her face, mixing with tears she couldn't hold back. He nodded. "I do." "And do you, Lucy Thompson, take Matthew Caldwell?" Her lips quivered as the preacher's voice thundered. "I do," she answered, barely audible. "By the authority vested in me by the state of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife." Lightning streaked across the sky, and in that flash, Lucy caught the look in Matthew's eyes. Kindness tempered by a trace of fear for the unknown. They were two strangers bound by necessity, but in that moment it felt almost fated. No one cheered. The elements did enough roaring for all of them. The newly married couple dashed inside, soaked to the bone. Mrs. White offered them towels as the storm battered the ranch. It was a stark, unromantic wedding day, overshadowed by thunder and fear. Yet Lucy realized, as she stood dripping by the hearth, that she felt an odd sense of relief. She was now Mrs. Caldwell, at least in name, and Jonah was safe, or at least safer than he had been in a long time. In the days that followed the impromptu wedding, Jonah's condition gradually improved. The fever subsided enough that he could open his eyes and even manage a thin smile when Lucy stroked his hair. Dr. Whitman, satisfied with Jonah's response to the medications, pronounced him out of immediate danger, but warned they were not yet out of the woods. The ranch bustled with activity, as it always did, but now a gentle hush filled the main house. Everyone was mindful of Jonah's need for quiet. Lucy tended him hour after hour, stepping out only when she absolutely had to. Matthew discreetly ensured that she had everything: fresh linens, nourishing food, a comfortable place to sleep. She took the small bedroom next to Jonah's, while Matthew continued to occupy his own room at the opposite end of the hall. Though they were married, Lucy and Matthew remained strangers in many ways. He would knock on her door each morning to check on Jonah, exchange a few words, and then ride out to handle ranch business. Lucy knew every inch of Jonah's room, yet almost nothing about her husband's ranch or his life. Sometimes she glanced at the wide hallway leading to the rest of the house and felt she was peering into another world, a place she dared not venture without an invitation. The days blurred together in a cycle of chores. Lucy insisted on helping Mrs. White in the kitchen. She swept floors, peeled potatoes, boiled water, and pressed laundry. It was her way of repaying the kindness she and Jonah had received. Despite her exhaustion, Lucy's spirits lifted each time Jonah managed a few words. One afternoon, as Lucy folded fresh sheets on the porch, Matthew approached. He removed his hat, running a hand through his dusty hair. "I want to thank you for all you're doing to help around here," he said. "But you need rest. You still look worn out." Lucy gave him a polite smile. "I can't just sit around while you and Mrs. White do everything." He nodded in understanding. "I suppose not. Well, I was thinking it might be good for you to get to know the land. The weather's nice today. Maybe you could ride out with me for an hour or two, get some fresh air." Lucy's nerves fluttered. She remembered the muddy torrent, the wagon swept away in the flood. I'm not very good on a horse. I'll take it slow. Promise, Matthew said gently. Mrs. White intervened with a wise smile. "Go on now, dear. I can look after Jonah for a spell." After a moment's hesitation, Lucy agreed. In less than half an hour, she found herself in the corral, wearing a borrowed pair of trousers and a too big flannel shirt. She felt awkward, but Matthew had insisted it would be better for riding. He'd chosen a gentle mare named Daisy, and after helping Lucy into the saddle, he mounted his own stallion, Charger. With a slight click of their tongues, they set off at a leisurely pace, heading away from the ranch into the rolling expanse of prairie. They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of hooves lulling Lucy's nerves. The grasslands stretched out like a golden sea under the afternoon sun, dotted here and there by clumps of sagebrush. Occasional gusts of wind carried the scent of wildflowers, a welcome change from the medicinal smells in Jonah's room. Matthew rode slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back. "You okay?" Lucy nodded, tightening her grip on the reins. "Yes. It's beautiful out here." He slowed his horse until he was beside her. They continued at a calm pace, side by side. Lucy noticed how the lines of worry on Matthew's face softened in the open air. She realized how little she knew about him, though they were legally man and wife. "May I ask," she began tentatively, "how you came to own this ranch?" Matthew shifted as if uneasy. "Inherited it. My father built it up, but he passed on when I was young. I took over when I turned 18. "I'm sorry," Lucy said softly. "Losing a parent is hard." He gave a grim nod. "Yeah, it was. But life goes on out here." Lucy wondered about his mother, about siblings, but she refrained from prying further. Instead, she told him a little about her life in Chicago, how she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher before Jonah was born. She left out the uglier parts for now, her husband's abandonment, the financial desperation. They reached a small ridge overlooking a shallow creek. Weeds and wildflowers swayed along its banks, and the water shimmered under the sun. Matthew guided Charger to a halt and gestured for Lucy to do the same. He dismounted and offered his hand to help her down. As her feet touched the grass, she felt a surprising sense of calm. They walked toward the creek, letting the horses graze behind them. Matthew knelt, scooping up a handful of clear water. He splashed his face and motioned for Lucy to do the same. The coolness offered a sweet relief from the warm day. When Lucy rose, droplets of water glistening on her cheeks, she noticed Matthew watching her intently. For a moment, she felt vulnerable, exposed as a mother who had barged into his life burdened with a sick child. But in his gaze she saw not judgment, but something akin to understanding. "I'm sorry," she said, suddenly surprising even herself. "I'm sorry that my problems have become yours." Matthew's jaw tightened. Never apologize for needing help. Out here we help each other, or we perish. Besides, Jonah's a good kid. He deserves a chance. Tears pricked at Lucy's eyes. She nodded, unable to speak. In that moment, her heart beat with a flicker of hope. Maybe she and Jonah could find a measure of peace on this ranch. Maybe Matthew Caldwell was more than just a cowboy with a sense of duty. The next few weeks brought slow but steady improvement to Jonah's health. He could sit up in bed and talk without gasping for breath. Dr. Whitman grinned one morning as he examined Jonah's chest. "He's pulling through. Another month of rest and he might be on his feet." Lucy, relieved beyond measure, felt a wave of gratitude each time she saw Matthew. Their shared life had fallen into a quiet rhythm. Though they still slept in separate rooms, they shared meals discussing the ranch's progress and Jonah's recovery. Sometimes Lucy read aloud from a tattered book of poems to Jonah, and Matthew would stand silently in the doorway, listening. A bond, tentative, fragile, was forming. But life in the West seldom allowed peace for long. One day, as Lucy was washing dishes after the midday meal, she heard a commotion outside. Shouts, hooves pounding the ground, and the barking of the ranch dogs. She rushed to the window. A man on horseback was yelling for Matthew, brandishing a revolver in the air. Lucy's blood ran cold. She turned to see Jonah, who had shuffled into the kitchen on trembling legs. His eyes were vain with fear. Lucy hurried him back into his bed. "Stay here," she whispered, dread gnawing at her stomach. She stepped onto the porch, just in time, to see Matthew confront the armed man. Several ranch hands stood at a distance, hands near their holstered guns, ready to intervene if things got ugly. The stranger was tall, with a scar slicing across his cheek, and wore a battered duster caked in dust. Rage twisted his features. "You Caldwell," the man snarled. Matthew's stance was calm but firm. "I am," the stranger spat. "Name's Stephen Thompson. I'm here for my son." Lucy's heart felt like it stopped mid-beat. Stephen, the man she had once called her husband and Jonah's father. A hush fell over the ranch. The only sound was the restless shifting of Stephen's horse. Lucy clutched the porch railing to steady herself. Her mind raced. How had Stephen found them? Why now, after abandoning them for so long? Matthew's voice was dangerously steady. Your son Stephen glared at him. "Don't play dumb. I heard about a woman and a boy being cared for on this ranch. Figured it must be Lucy and Jonah. The woman's mine, and so's the child." Lucy rushed forward. "I'm not yours. You left us, Stephen." He sneered. "That don't matter. The boy's legally mine. And if you think I'm leaving without him, you're dead wrong." Matthew's hand hovered near his revolver, but he didn't draw. "You have no rights here. Lucy's under my protection, and so is Jonah." Stephen pointed his gun at Matthew. "We'll see about that." Time seemed to freeze. The ranch hands tensed, ready to spring. Lucy felt her world spinning. This was the man who had nearly destroyed her. Jonah's father, a gambler and a drunk, who had abandoned them in a city far away. Now he was here, demanding the child he had once forsaken. Matthew's eyes flickered with an anger Lucy had never seen before. He didn't even flinch when Stephen aimed the revolver. The ranch hands, 4 of them, spread out in a half-circle. Tension crackled as the air, thick as gunpowder. "You raise that gun to me again," Matthew warned softly, "and I'll see that you regret it." Stephen sneered, his lips curling. "You talk big cowboy. But that boy is my blood, and I'm taking him back. I got a new job down in Colorado, pays good. I ain't leaving my son behind." Lucy stepped forward, her heart hammering. "You lost the right to call him your son when you left us with nothing. You never cared for him when he was a baby. You wouldn't know how to care for him now, especially when he's been fighting for his life." "Quiet, woman," Stephen snapped. He swung the revolver in Lucy's direction, and Matthew lunged. In one swift move, Matthew knocked the gun away. A shot rang out, and a ranch hand yelled out in alarm. The bullet ricocheted off the porch railing, sending a spray of wood splinters. Chaos erupted. Stephen tried to wrestle his gun back, but Matthew pinned his arm. Lucy staggered back, her ears ringing from the gunshot. 2 ranch hands rushed forward, grabbing Stephen, forcing him to drop the weapon. The moment it clattered to the ground, Matthew kicked it away. Ben Randall, panting, retrieved the revolver. "You want me to run him out of town?" "Boss." Lucy couldn't stop shaking. She locked eyes with Matthew, who looked ready to strangle Stephen with his bare hands. But the law was the law, even in a place as wild as Wyoming. Matthew nodded, his voice rough. "He's trespassing, threatening a woman and her child. Get him to the sheriff." Stephen snarled, spitting at Lucy's feet. "You think you've won the laws on my side. He's my boy, and I'll be back with a legal claim." Lucy felt tears threaten. She stepped into the house as Ben and another hand dragged Stephen away, the dust swirling around them. Jonah stood in the hallway, trembling. Lucy enveloped him in her arms, not caring that it might strain his fragile condition. Matthew came in moments later, brushing sawdust from his shirt. He placed a hand on Jonah's head. His expression was a mix of fury and concern. "You all right?" he asked softly. Jonah nodded, though tears slid down his cheeks. Lucy could hardly speak. Fear knotted her throat. Stephen was right. He could pursue a legal claim. Even if he was a neglectful father, the law might favor him as a blood relative. Panic surged. What if Stephen took Jonah away? Matthew seemed to read her mind. "I won't let that happen," he said quietly. "He'll have to go through me to take Jonah, and he'll find that's near impossible." Despite the terror still roiling within her, Lucy felt some measure of comfort in Matthew's words. She looked at her husband, this man who had married her out of kindness, and saw in his eyes a vow stronger than any bullet. Stephen Thompson didn't return immediately, but his threat lingered like a storm cloud over the ranch. Lucy found herself jumping at every unexpected noise, every rider approaching on the dusty road. Jonah's health wavered under the new tension, his anxiety manifesting in sleepless nights and a slight return of his fever. Dr. Whitman cautioned Lucy to keep Jonah calm. Stress was the last thing he needed. Matthew got word through Judge John James, a local magistrate known for his fair but strict rulings, that Stephen had filed a formal petition for custody. The news weighed heavily on everyone, including the ranch hands who had grown fond of Jonah's gentle Siruswulu. One day Lucy found Matthew in the study, poring over law books borrowed from the judge's office. He looked up, exhaustion etched on his face. "The law's complicated," he muttered. "Stephen's got a case being the boy's father. But you're his mother, and we're married." That counts for something. Lucy sat down, twisting her hands in her lap. I hate this. Jonah's finally getting better. And now this. Matthew reached across the table, covering her hand with his. The warmth of his touch steadied her. We'll fight. I promise you. She nodded, blinking away tears. Thank you. She swallowed hard. I just can't shake the feeling that Stephen won't give up without a fight. Matthew nodded grimly. He's reckless. But we have the advantage of community. Here people know you, they see how you care for Jonah. And if Stephen tries violence again, the sheriff won't take kindly to it. Lucy closed her eyes, inhaling a shaky breath. She reminded herself of the progress Jonah had made, how each day he grew a little stronger. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Amidst the uncertainty, Lucy discovered small moments of grace. Jonah smiled more often. He regained enough energy to sit outside under the ranch's shade tree on warm afternoons, a blanket draped over his knees. Lucy would join him, reading aloud. Sometimes Matthew brought a couple of horses near the tree so Jonah could stroke their manes and feed them apples. The boy's eyes shone with wonder each time the gentle animals nuzzled his hand. Lucy's relationship with Matthew also evolved. Though they initially shared a marriage of convenience, Lucy found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his unwavering moral compass, and the way he devoted himself to protecting her son. Sometimes in the evenings, they'd share a cup of coffee in the kitchen after the ranch hands retired for the night. I never did ask, Lucy said softly one evening, fiddling with the handle of her mug. But why did you do all this? Why marry me a stranger with a sick child? Matthew gazed into his coffee, the steam fogging his expression. He hesitated, and Lucy wondered if he even had an answer. But then he spoke, voice low and measured, because it was the right thing to do. Out here, we take care of each other. And because... He trailed off, meeting her eyes. Because I couldn't bear to see Jonah suffer. And maybe I was tired of being alone too. Lucy's cheeks warmed. Her life had been a relentless struggle for so long, there was precious little room for tenderness. Yet here it was, like a fragile seed sprouting in the desert, fed by a trickle of compassion. She reached out and covered Matthew's hand with hers. For a moment, they allowed themselves to simply be united by a bond that went beyond necessity. The uneasy peace didn't last. A month after the custody filing, Stephen reappeared with a group of men who claimed to represent the legal interests of Jonah. They arrived with an official letter from a traveling circuit judge stating that Stephen was within his rights to demand a hearing. The hearing would determine whether Jonah was better off with his biological father or with Lucy and her new husband. Tears streaked Lucy's face when she read the summons. They'll drag Jonah to some courtroom, she murmured, arms wrapped around the trembling boy. They won't care if it kills him. Matthew clenched his fists, fury simmering beneath the surface. The thought of that brute is even holding any legal power over Jonah was infuriating. Yet the law in the territories could be painfully archaic, giving paternal rights more weight than maternal or custodial ones. The local sheriff, a grizzled man named Sheriff Ellis Grant, arrived at the ranch to inform them that a hearing was scheduled at the county seat in 2 weeks. Lucy's stomach lurched at the idea of bringing Jonah so far from the ranch. Dr. Whitman insisted the stress and travel might worsen Jonah's recovery, but there was no choice. Ignoring the summons would weaken their case. The day before they were set to leave, Lucy found Jonah sitting on the edge of his bed, tears in his eyes. He clutched a wooden horse that Matthew had whittled for him. "I'm scared, Ma," he whispered. Lucy sat beside him, pulling him close. "I know, sweetheart. But we're going together. Mr. Matthew will be with us." Jonah nodded, but his thin shoulders still trembled. Lucy brushed a lock of hair from his forehead. "Do you remember the stories I used to tell you about the brave knights who fought for what was right no matter the odds?" Jonah tried a wobbly smile. "Yeah, that's what we have to do," Lucy said. "Be brave knights, even if we're afraid." He leaned against her eyes, fluttering closed. Lucy's heart clenched. She knew that if she lost Jonah, she would lose everything. They travelled by wagon to the county seat, a small, bustling town with a clapboard courthouse near the central road. Dr. Whitman came along, determined to argue that Jonah needed specialized care. Matthew guided the horses, occasionally glancing back at Lucy and Jonah. Lucy's hands were white-knuckled on Jonah's blanket, her face drawn. Inside the courthouse, a tense hush fell. Stephen stood on one side, flanked by two men in suits who served as his counsel. Lucy and Matthew took the other side with Dr. Whitman and a local lawyer named Gregory Bell, who had agreed to represent Lucy out of loyalty to Matthew. Jonah sat close to Lucy, pale and trembling. The circuit judge, a portly man with thinning hair named Judge Carlyle, oversaw the hearing. He looked bored and impatient, but the seriousness of the matter gradually seeped into his expression as the arguments unfolded. Stephen's lawyer began by asserting paternal rights. Mr. Thompson acknowledges past mistakes, but insists he has changed. He seeks custody to raise his son properly. Lucy and Gregory Bell countered with the harsh truth. Mr. Thompson abandoned Lucy and Jonah years ago. He left them in dire straits. Lucy remarried, and her husband, Mr. Caldwell, has been supporting Jonah's medical care. It would be detrimental to remove Jonah from a stable environment where he's finally recovering. Dr. Whitman took the stand, explaining Jonah's condition. Relocating him at this stage could cause a relapse of his fever. The stress alone is dangerous to a child with a compromised immune system. Stephen, fidgeting occasionally, shot Lucy hateful glares. "I got a good job now. I can provide." He insisted, but his tone was far from convincing. He also tried to discredit Lucy by insinuating she had run away with Jonah. Lucy fought back tears as she recounted the day he abandoned them in a tenement, leaving them penniless. Finally, the judge asked Jonah if he wanted to speak. The boy's face blanched, and Lucy squeezed his hand reassuringly. Jonah rose, his small body trembling. "When my pa left Ma and I, we didn't have any food. Sometimes," Jonah said, voice quivering. "She always tried to take care of me. And Mr. Caldwell saved my life. I want to stay with Ma and Mr. Caldwell." An uneasy hush settled. The judge exhaled, drumming his fingertips on the bench. "It's clear the mother has been the child's primary caregiver," he said slowly. "The father's claims of readiness are unproven. However, the law recognizes paternal rights. I want more testimony." Judge Carlyle turned to Lucy. "Mrs. Caldwell, your husband is providing for you and your child. Are you willing and able to continue caring for Jonah without his biological father's involvement?" Lucy nodded, tears brimming. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge paused. "Well, it's my inclination to keep a child in a stable environment. But Mr. Thompson has every right to petition. I'm not satisfied he has the means to care for Jonah's medical needs." "Doctor, you said the boy is still fragile, Doctor." Whitman nodded emphatically. "He needs another few months of careful monitoring." Judge Carlyle studied Stephen. "Mr. Thompson, your history of abandonment is concerning. I'm placing Jonah under the guardianship of his mother and her husband, Mr. Caldwell, for the next 6 months. If you wish, you can repetition after that period to revisit custody, provided you can show consistent financial stability and a reformed lifestyle. But for now, Jonah remains with the Caldwells. Relief crashed over Lucy like a wave. She clasped Jonah to her side, tears of joy streaming down her face. Matthew exhaled a breath he'd been holding, offering a nod of gratitude to Gregory Bell and Dr. Whitman. Stephen's seethed fists clenched. But the law had spoken. As the gavel struck, Lucy felt the first real hint of safety in weeks. Jonah was coming home. The ride back to the ranch was markedly lighter, despite the looming threat that Stephen could still cause trouble in 6 months. At least for now, Lucy and Jonah were safe. Jonah even drifted off to sleep in Lucy's lap, exhaustion finally giving way to relief. Back at the ranch, the hands offered quiet congratulations. Mrs. White baked a small cake in celebration. Matthew, unusually talkative, told Lucy stories of the ranch's earliest days. He spoke of how his father had driven their first herd of cattle across hazardous terrain, how they nearly lost everything in a blizzard, and how his mother, long gone, had been the glue that held them together. Lucy listened with quiet respect. Though Stephen's shadow lurked, she allowed herself to savor the moment. She had a home now, a husband who, while initially a stranger, had proven himself to be a man of deep integrity. And Jonah was recovering day by day. As weeks turned into months, Jonah regained enough strength to help with simple chores. He fed the chickens, learned to brush the horses, and even followed Matthew around with wide-eyed admiration. Lucy found a sense of peace in daily tasks, cooking with Mrs. White, sewing new curtains, keeping the house tidy. She no longer felt like a guest, but rather a partner in the life of the ranch. In the evenings, she and Matthew grew closer. They'd share quiet moments by the hearth, Lucy with her sewing, Matthew whittling small animals out of wood. Their conversations floated between Jonah's progress, the ranch's finances, and childhood memories. Over time, Lucy's gratitude for Matthew deepened into something warmer, more profound, a realization that she cared for him deeply, perhaps even loved him. Yet one lingering question remained. The arrangement they'd made was originally temporary, marry to save Jonah. Then part ways once he recovered, if that's what Lucy wanted. But as the child's health stabilized, Lucy realized she had no desire to leave. The ranch felt like the home she had yearned for all her life. But would Matthew want her to stay? Or would he want to return to solitude once Jonah was safe? One afternoon, Lucy stood on the porch watching Jonah feed a young colt. Matthew approached, hands tucked in his pockets. "He's looking stronger by the day," he said. Lucy smiled. "He is." "I can never repay you, Matt." He shrugged, his eyes fixed on Jonah. "Don't need repaying. Not for this." An awkward silence settled. Lucy turned, gathering courage. I was wondering if our arrangement was still just an arrangement." Matthew looked at her, brow furrowed. "I don't follow." Lucy's cheeks warmed. "You married me to help Jonah. That mission is nearly accomplished. If you wanted me to leave Jonah, and I could." Before she could finish, Matthew stepped closer. He placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Lucy, I don't want you to leave. Ever." Relief and emotion welled inside her. She blinked back, tears. For so long she had carried the fear of being cast out once her usefulness ended. She placed her hand over Matthew's. "I don't want to leave either," she admitted, her voice trembling with sincerity. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch thrived under the glow of a Wyoming summer. grass grew tall, and the cattle grazed contentedly. Jonah discovered the joy of childhood again, something he'd missed for too long. He ran around with the ranch dogs playing fetch and squealed with delight when Mrs. White let him lick the spoon after making icing for a cake. His laughter echoed off the barn walls, a testament to new life and second chances. Lucy and Matthew's relationship transformed into a genuine marriage. They began sharing a room, a bed, and the quiet intimacy of dawn coffees and late-night whispers. Every time Lucy felt Jonah's arms wrapped around her in a hug, or Matthew's steady presence beside her, she thanked the heavens for guiding her steps to this ranch, even if it had been in a desperate, muddy scramble. In the local town, rumors abounded. "Did you hear about that boy who nearly died, but was saved by Caldwell? They say Lucy was a mess, but now she looks happier than a June bride. Stephen Thompson tried to get custody, but the judge put him in his place," and so on. But Lucy learned to ignore the gossip. She had a home, a family, everything she'd prayed for, but never believed she could have. Stephen remained a distant threat, but with each passing day, Lucy grew stronger and more confident in her new life. If he returned, they would be ready. Until then, she refused to let fear steal her happiness. And return he did. Late one afternoon, just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Stephen galloped onto the property again. Lucy heard the shouting before she saw him. She rushed outside, only to find Matthew facing him near the barn. Jonah cowered behind the door. Stephen's face was flushed with anger. "I don't care what that judge said, I'm here for my boy." Matthew's eyes blazed. "You come anywhere near Jonah, I'll see that the sheriff locks you up for trespassing and harassment." Stephen laughed bitterly. "Yeah, well, maybe I'll take it to another judge. One that's not so soft. Maybe I got some money saved for bribes, who knows?" Lucy trembled with anger. She stepped out from behind Matthew, ignoring his protective gesture. "Stephen, you don't scare me anymore. Jonah is staying here, and if you threaten us again, I'll make sure you regret it." Stephen glared at her, then at Matthew. "You think you're so high and mighty." His hand drifted to his hip, where a gun might be holstered, but he found empty space. The ranch hands had disarmed him last time, and he hadn't been allowed to carry on the Caldwell property since. He swore under his breath, frustration radiating from every pore. "Get off my land," Matthew growled, "or do I need to fetch the sheriff?" Stephen spun on his heel, kicking up dust as he stormed away. But at the edge of the ranch yard, he paused, turning back with a sneer. "Mark my words, Caldwell. This ain't over." Lucy sagged against Matthew's relief, mixing with lingering fear. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Jonah peeked out from behind the door, eyes wide. Matthew gave him a reassuring nod. "He won't hurt you," Matthew said. "I swear it." Lucy clung to the promise. They had come too far, overcome too many obstacles to let Stephen's fury tear them apart. In the end, Stephen's threats remained just that, threats. The months rolled on, and despite occasional ominous rumors that he might resurface, he never did. Some said he lost his savings in a poker game down in Texas. Others claimed he wandered to the Dakotas seeking gold. Lucy refused to dwell on him. She poured her energy into her new family. Jonah, bright-eyed and full of life, began helping Matthew with small ranch tasks, learning to ride a small pony. Dr. Whitman declared him fit as a fiddle by the time winter arrived. Lucy taught him to read and write better than any frontier school might. She even took up a role teaching neighboring ranch kids once a week in the ranch's main room. The children sat on stools and benches while Lucy guided them through basic literacy. As for Lucy and Matthew, Their bond grew deeper with each passing season. The memory of their wedding day, drenched in rain and overshadowed by the urgent need to save Jonah's life, became a cherished story rather than a tale of desperation. Matthew would tease Lucy about the mud clinging to her hair, and she'd laugh, recalling how she'd wanted to vanish from embarrassment. Life had a way of forging the strongest ties from the most broken circumstances. On the ranch, a new normal settled in one of honest work, simple pleasures, and unwavering devotion. Lucy's refusal to leave became a testament to the power of hope, love, and second chances. The land might be harsh and threats might lurk on the horizon, but within the sturdy walls of Caldwell Ranch, they had found sanctuary and each other. In the end, love often grows in the most unexpected places, like a flower taking root in the desert. Lucy arrived at Caldwell Ranch covered in mud, clinging to a dying boy. But a cowboy with a heart bigger than the Wyoming sky took her hand in marriage and changed both their lives forever. Through thunderous showdowns, courtroom battles, and the ever-looming threat of an unfit father, they fought for Jonah's life and found an unbreakable bond. It wasn't just about saving a child. It was about forging a family out of grit, faith, and hard-won love. If you've been touched by the courage, resilience, and hope in this story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more real-life dramas and inspiring tales. Your support helps us bring more stories of humanity's triumphs to light. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we stand together against all odds.